Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. We're having a few technical issues with the muting. Delighted anyway to welcome you to the virtual launch of the 2020 Global Deal Flagship Report entitled Social Dialogue, Skills and COVID-19. My name is Alex Taylor. I'm delighted to be a European journalist based here in Paris, and it's a pleasure to be your moderator today. Before we start, one or two practical questions. You can listen to this webinar in English, French, and Spanish. To make the selection, you will need to go to the icon that looks like a globe at the bottom of your screen, and there you will see the option for each language. If you switch off, you can listen to the original language. I would like to welcome you to Veronica Nielsen, the head of the Global Deal Support Unit. Hello, Veronica, there she is, she's waving, and she will take over if we have any of the famed technical issues. This launch event is currently live on Zoom. We're delighted to have you with us. You're also encouraged to follow the Global Deal's live Twitter feed at the Global Deal, and the hashtags that are being used for this event are hashtag Global Deal, Social Dialogue, Skills, and COVID-19. I think there's more than about 300 people currently following this event all around the world, including representatives from governments, from businesses and employers organizations, trade unions, international and civil society organizations, as well as local and regional administrations. In a few seconds, we will move to the introductory session of this launch event, which will feature the OECD, the ILO, and the government of Sweden. A panel discussion with high-level representatives from Global Deal partners will follow, and you'll be able to interact with the panelists by asking questions in writing. We will then go back to the OECD, the ILO, and Sweden for some closing remarks. Now, for those of you not familiar with the Global Deal, let me just mention that it's a multi-stakeholder partnership for decent work and inclusive growth. Global Deal partners promote social dialogue in very different ways, for example, through their commitments. You will find a summary of the commitments in this new report, and obviously we'll be coming back to that during today's launch event. So today's discussion will also look at the role of social partners in mitigating the impact of the pandemic and in developing the skills we will all need in the future. But first of all, I'm going to ask our three introductory speakers to turn on their videos and microphones. That's Gurría, Guy, Ryder, and Minister Hallberg. So I think you are now with us. We're delighted. Hello, welcome from wherever you are in the world. So I'm going to start with the OECD Secretary General, Gurría. Could you tell us what you think are the key findings of the flagship report? Over to you, Angel.
Hallberg, and also to Director General Ryder. Dear friends, I'm pleased to launch the new Global Deal Report, which is Social Dialogue, Skills, and COVID-19. It comes at a difficult time for the global economy. Our latest economic projections are bleak. Global GDP expected to contract by 4.5% by 2020. And by April 2020, OECD unemployment rate had reached 8.8%, the highest in a decade. A virus resurgence could cut another 2 or 3 percentage points from global growth in 2021, leaving us with the very high unemployment, but also with very weak investment prospects. Governments must continue to provide policy support that is targeted and adapted to these changing conditions. Our new global deal shows that this report shows that the social dialogue has shaped the policies that supported workers, that sustained the economy, to help to boost confidence and curb the most immediate welfare effects of the crisis. Let me provide some examples. In several countries such as Argentina, Austria, Denmark, Sweden, South Africa, social dialogue maintained employment by facilitating short-time working arrangements. In Austria, where a short-time work system already existed, social partners agreed to shorten the notice period from six weeks to 48 hours, to expand access for small and micro enterprises, increase the wage replacement rate, and in return, workers agreed to forego 3 weeks of holiday if the crisis lasted longer than 3 months. As a result, many businesses refrained from dismissing workers. Trade unions accepted reduced working hours and monthly wages, while governments compensated some of the wage losses. Second, social dialogue has proven crucial for health and safety at the workplace. In several countries, sectors, and companies, social partners and governments have negotiated measures that limit the spread of the virus and promote a safe return to work. In Italy, in early March, social partners negotiated a code of good conduct. Similar agreements were struck in automobile factories in the US, retail stores in Austria, global companies like Telefonica. Social dialogue's importance is not limited to the immediate management of the crisis. It also helps countries meet the UN 2030 agenda commitments and to be better prepared to address today's megatrends, such as globalization, digitalization, climate change. So as we advance through these shifts, workers must be equipped with the necessary skills to adapt and thrive. Our report provides important evidence on how social dialogue can support well-functioning systems of adult learning across the globe. Social partners are working together in skills councils to assess skills demands and to draft adult learning strategies. Collective agreements are supporting training rights and enforcing training levies, sometimes at the expense of higher wages. Initiatives for displaced workers are particularly important as COVID-19 is triggering waves of labor market restructuring. Sweden, for example, has job security councils, jointly managed by employers and trade union organizations, that provide timely guidance, advice, and training to workers, even before any dismissal takes place. In fact, with the idea that you reduce dismissals. Our Global Deal partners are continuing to advance social dialogue by voluntarily engaging in a diverse range of specific commitments. Some companies have concluded global framework agreements with trade unions, ensuring social dialogue capacity all along their supply chains. Others are committing to pay a living wage for all their global operations. Governments are addressing precarious work practices in cooperation with the social partners. And civil society organizations are mobilizing the power of fair trade by ensuring that the producers they buy from engage in social dialogue. At the OECD, our engagement with business at OECD, the BIAC, and the Trade Union Advisory Committee, the TUAC, is also part of our efforts to promote social dialogue. And our Business for Inclusive Growth initiative, B4IG, brings together 40 multinationals whose CEOs initially signed a pledge to fight against inequalities. That was back in mid-2019 in the context of the G7 summit in Biarritz. But they're now refocusing their work to help address the challenges posed by COVID-19. Now, the OECD is also supporting countries in shaping their response to the crisis. Our COVID-19 digital hub, launched last March, in the first few days of the crisis, has now over 155 COVID-related policy briefs and a policy tracker. It has received more than 1.2 million unique visitors so far, mostly policymakers. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the importance of social dialogue cannot be overstated, particularly at this time. Let's work together to support workers, to protect livelihoods, to ensure they have the skills needed for the post-COVID labor market and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Angel Gurría, for that introduction. We're delighted to have with us Guy Ryder, who's the ILO Director General. Maybe the same question to you from the ILO perspective. What would be your key takeaways from the report? Guy.
Thanks very much, Alex, and my greetings to Minister Hallberg and to Secretary General Gurría. And I'm delighted to be taking part in this virtual launch of what I think is a very important flagship report. Well, what are the key messages? That's a question you put to me, Alex. I think the key one, and I'm afraid I'm just going to repeat what Angel Gurría has just said, in these extraordinarily difficult times, social dialogue simply has never been more important. Why? Because social dialogue helps us build resilience to absorb shocks of the type we're now experiencing. It helps us to find ways forward from crisis. And when there are tough decisions to be taken, it contributes greatly to finding fair, legitimate, and therefore accepted outcomes. And certainly the pandemic has caused enormous pain worldwide with, as we all know, more than 1 million people having already lost their lives, many millions more who have lost their livelihoods and their incomes, and so many people now who fear that if they go to work, they run the risk of catching the virus. Let me just sort of focus in on one sector, which is very much on the minds of many global deal participants, the garment industry. There, the lockdowns and other measures have resulted in a widespread retail and factory closures, furloughs or layoffs. And these effects have rippled all along global value chains, with orders being cancelled and suppliers, brands and retailers often having been unable to pay workers or to keep them on. Situations which just beg us to apply social dialogue. And other sectors, of course, have experienced similar or even worse. In the aggregate, we at the ILO estimate that in the second quarter of 2020, the equivalent of 495 million full-time job equivalents were lost around the world. And that figure is overwhelming. And I think that we have to accept that the aftermath and the effects on the labor market generated by this crisis are going to be with us for a considerable time. And what I think needs to be well understood and then acted upon is that the pain, the impact is falling disproportionately on those who are least able to cope with it, the most vulnerable in the world of work. So we think of women workers, young people, those with disabilities, indigenous communities, migrant workers. And this is genuinely a global crisis. No country, no regions are immune. Latin America and the Caribbean have lost the equivalent of 80 million jobs, Africa 60, and Asia and Pacific no less than 265 million. And so I think we're all aware that we need to respond globally as well with multifaceted and comprehensive responses. And that means delivering, and it's not always easy, the right health, economic, employment, and social policies in combination and at the right time. And that takes me back, of course, to social dialogue and to the global deal. Now, this second flagship report focuses on the role of social dialogue in promoting lifelong learning and skills development in recovery from the crisis. And it does so because one of the most important elements in building a better future of work is and will be investment in workers. And here is one of the dilemmas that we face immediately. We know that one of the impacts of the pandemic has been the massive disruption of education and training, be it schools, be it colleges and universities, be it workplace training. And although some institutions have been able to convert, to migrate online, many have not. And here again, there is an asymmetric impact because those without access to digital technologies run the risk of being left even further behind than they might otherwise be. So what we think we need to be talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is a human-centered approach to recovery and to the future of work. That is the message at the heart of the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work that was adopted by our conference last year. It's got a lot of support, and I think it needs to lie at the heart of something I'll be proposing to the ILO governing body in a couple of weeks, a new global initiative for a human-centered recovery from the pandemic. And obviously, skills have to be at the center of that agenda. I guess the question is not just more skills, what skills? How do we keep them fresh? How do we keep them up to date? How do we finance skill acquisition? I think that the answer to those questions bring us back to social dialogue. Who knows better what is required in the way of skills in labour markets than the real actors of labour markets? Employers' organisations, trade unions, as well as government. And this makes, of course, the case for social dialogue. I think the flagship report gives us some great examples. Angel has already mentioned some of them of good practices. So we see, for example, in South Africa, the government and social partners have come together in a national skills accord. In Uruguay, there is a National Institute for Employment and Vocational Training, which manages a labour reconversion fund with sectoral committees. In Spain, in response to the pandemic, the government and social partners have developed new training programs under the framework of Digitize Yourself. And if you put it all together, we need to anticipate skills needs. We need to make sure that we put in place lifelong learning processes, and we need to ensure accessibility to all so that we do not unwittingly open up even greater inequalities in our world of work and in our societies. We believe that international labour standards are particularly helpful in these endeavours, and I can mention ILO Convention 142 on human resource development, and tools like these can really help us to create the enabling environment for social dialogue and skills development that we all need. That's really what I take from this flagship report. I think it's a tremendously important contribution and an area that I think needs to be integrated fully in the task to which we must all turn our hands now, which is that of building back better out of this crisis. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much indeed, Guy. It would be a big round of applause if we were at a conference centre, but I'm sure you can hear us virtually. Thank you from the ILO perspective. We're delighted to have with us the Swedish Minister, Anna Hallberg. Hello. As people know, the global deal was initiated in Sweden in 2016 against a background of rising inequalities, concerns about globalisation, and also a populist backlash, like in so many countries. On top of it, we're now struggling with something totally unexpected, the effects of COVID-19. I think it'd be interesting to hear from you what progress has been made over these last 4 years, and in what way can the global deal that you initiated make a difference? Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor, and thank you for your questions. They are, of course, highly relevant. I would like to start by thanking the Global Deal Support Unit for your efforts producing and coordinating this Global Deal Flagship Report. And as the report is also a result of a mutual efforts between the OECD and the ILO, I would like to really extend my gratitude also to Secretary General Gurría and Director General Ryder for your consistent support as co-founders of the Global Deal. The report makes a strong case regarding how essential effective social dialogue is for achieving decent work, sound industrial relations, and in extension, of course, also better societies. And it's vital for the social partners to play a part in shaping change, and even more so in these times of crisis. And starting with the first part of your question, why did Sweden initiate the Global Deal, and in what way can the Global Deal make a difference, and how has it developed? Well, the Global Deal concept was developed jointly by Sweden, the ILO, and the OECD. And Sweden taking this initiative is no coincidence, of course. Our model with strong, independent social partners has served us very well during decades. And Global Deal is based on a strong belief that social dialogue and sound industrial relations are part of a successful society. And we must not forget that the right to decent work is also recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Besides providing political support for social dialogue, the Global Deal is offering a platform for interaction where opportunities for gains that mutually benefit workers, businesses, and governments can be highlighted and promoted. And when Global Deal was initiated, the world economy, as we all know, was still recovering from the global financial crisis, and no one could really predict the dramatic development due to the COVID-19, of course. But we really have witnessed the last 8 to 10 months, maybe in practice, and all parts of the society, how we really have been affected. And so then we can ask ourselves, is Global Deal in this new and dramatically different global environment, is it still relevant? Well, I couldn't more than agree to the previous speakers here that, of course, it's more relevant than ever. Social dialogue is really one of the key stones to step forward now from this very dramatic, but also period, but also where we can find new opportunities together if we really do it in the right way with a social dialogue as a basis and platform. Of course, the current pandemic has a devastating impact on the global labor market, and millions of people have lost their jobs. And as shown in the report that was launched today, social dialogue is a useful tool for labor market organizations, labor market transitions in times of crisis, really where social dialogue can play and must play right now a critical role. And I fully agree. It's really clearly shown here and illustrated by the number of agreements in many countries negotiated by social partners as a result of the outbreak of the pandemic. So against this background, I believe that the Global Deal partnership is more relevant than ever. And then talking about the partnership, how has this initiative and the partnership process progressed during the last couple of months and years? Well, I think we all know that the number of partners of the Global Deal Initiative has grown. We are more than 100 now. I think, from my point of view, this is nothing really how many we could be in the future, because I see there's so much more we can do together. I know there's so many partners, countries, businesses, unions that really share the vision of using social dialogue as a tool for promoting decent work, quality jobs, and inclusive growth. And the Global Deal offers really a unique platform to accelerate this positive change. So I think that we should all try to really spread the word and see to that we have more partners on board, and that we also can have even more of an active partnership in the framework of the Global Deal. And it is by concrete actions by partners that we move forward towards the vision. And of course, social dialogue is not a quick fix. It's nothing that we can really do from one month to another. And we also start on different levels here, from different kind of levels when it comes to countries and businesses and so on. And we can respect that, but we can also try to really, as partners of the global deal, also embrace this very difficult period, but move on together. And we can have this knowledge sharing, and I think it could be a much more used within the framework of the Global Deal Initiative. I'm sure that many of you have benefited from our different policy briefs produced, and also that many of you have participated in the high-level conference in February. I think it was a success from my point of view. I'm so glad that we were able to meet in Paris and have these very fruitful discussions together before the pandemic broke out. This was really, from my point of view, it was really in practice how we could see that the Global Deal Initiative, together, not only as the founders here, but also the partners, how much more we can do together if we meet and we also work together for this very much, the vision that we so very much share. Moving ahead, I believe that we should strive for a more agile partnership also, with more interactive and focused activities that creates added value to partners, even more added value. And to sum up then, I believe that we have a solid ground that has been laid for the global deal. I think we all should be very grateful that we have this initiative in place, hosted by the OECD, that we can now have this as a stepping stone when we should move out and build back better within this very, very hard crisis that we are all sharing the problems together. So I think let's do it together, and we must remember the global deal is more relevant than ever. Let's develop it and use a platform for mutual benefit of workers, businesses and governments. It's really a win-win-win situation that we have here in front of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. The applause once again is virtual, but nonetheless sincere. Thank you very much indeed to all three of you. We will be hearing from you again at the end of our panel discussion. We'll be delighted to find out what you have thought and what the interesting points for you will have been. But for the moment, thank you very much indeed. So this session will now aim at collecting the partners' views on the Flagship Report and on the Global Deal Partnership more in general, the stepping stone that the Minister just referred to. Please feel free to ask your questions. I will put them to our panelists. You have the chat function. If you could add your name and function, I will be more than happy towards the end of the session to put some of your questions to our four speakers who I would like to introduce to you now. So if they could switch on their videos from all around the world. We're delighted to have with us, for example, Boitumelo Moloi, who is the Deputy Minister of Employment and Labour in the Republic of South Africa. There we are. Hello, welcome. Thank you very much. I think you're based in Pretoria. Thank you for joining us. We have with us Sharan Burrow, who's the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, the ITUC. Bonjour à Bruxelles. Sanna, Lindgren, Director of Culture and Communication, Lindex. I think you're joining us from Stockholm, together with José, María, Vera, the Interim Executive Director of Oxfam International, and I think you're based in Madrid. So thank you all for being with us on this live Zoom conversation. So now our first round of questions will focus, obviously, as we've heard from the three introductory speeches, about the role of social dialogue in managing the consequence of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm going to go to Boitumelo Moloi, first of all. What's interesting with South Africa is immediately after the outbreak of the pandemic, your government and social partners engaged, I think, in a dialogue to discuss what was a truly national response in the area of employment and labour. The parties agreed to a short time work arrangement, I think it was in March of this year, as well as to a number of other measures. I think it'd be interesting if you tell us how that came about, what inspired you to do this, what exactly are the experiences and lessons that you have learned from this experience?
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our co-hosts for inviting us to the 2020 Global Deal Flagship Report virtual launch, but also acknowledge our moderator, Mr. Alex Taylor, our co-host, Mr. Angel Gurría, the Secretary General for OECD, Mr. Ryder, our Director General at the ILO, Miss Anna Hallberg, Minister for Foreign Trade and Nordic Affairs of Sweden. Also allow me, our moderator, to acknowledge my fellow panelists, Sharan, Burrow, Sanna, Lindgren, and José, María, Vera, as part of this session. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I would like to be brief, but just to indicate the fact that I'm sure you know that our processes almost are almost the same as the global flagship. We are having a structure called NETLEC, which deals with social partners, among others, to come up with many other agreements where we have representation from the labor movement, labor organizations, different labor federations. We've got different business organizations that are national bodies that represent a whole range of other business forum, and including those that represent the community in South Africa. So our social partners acted very swiftly to contain the meltdown in the economy through resorting to the country's social protection framework. And among others, cooperating through NETLEC itself, the social partners conceptualized the COVID-19 TERS, which is Employer Temporary Relief Scheme, to mitigate the dire economic impact of COVID-19 on businesses and workers who were affected by the pandemic due to temporary closures of businesses. So we had to sit down as a department, which we are a lead department, and this scheme through our UIF resides within our Department of Employment and Labor. And after consultations at NETLEC, our minister, Mr. Thulas Nxesi, on the 17th of March 2020, announced, actually we initially anticipated that we would at least spend something like 40 billion rand as a relief to businesses and employees. But we ended up, currently we are standing at 48 billion rand that we have already spent on this relief, which was set aside, and we continue to assist distressed companies as a way of ensuring that workers were not going to be laid off. And through this
Oh dear, we seem to have lost you. It's the kind of thing that happens, as I'm sure everybody is a bit aware of.
Companies and thus benefiting a short. This is like was like especially the workers are not laid off or find themselves in dire straits, but.
No, I think
to our entity of the UIF, your unemployment.
No, I think Boitumelo, we have a few technical issues as often on these Zoom meetings, but we'll come back to you later. I think you're frozen now. For the moment, I'll go over to Sharan Burrow, who's in Brussels. Obviously, global supply chains have not been spared from what's happening with the pandemic, both formal and informal workers at the bottom tier of the supply chains have experienced major disruptions because of what we've all been going through. It'd be interesting if you tell us how social dialogue, both at the global as well as the national level, has managed to deal with this. Sharan.
So global supply chains are in deep trouble, and it's a variety of reasons. Even before COVID-19, we saw inequality driving despair and anger, actually, with people because they couldn't live on the wages in too many situations they were receiving. That was impacting on global demand. You were seeing a huge shift in investment patterns. And indeed, COVID-19 just deepened this, and at least the non-essential supply chains face destitution. The South African minister just described for you the sort of support that's gone in at the national level, and we're very proud, as the report says, of the unions who moved with social dialogue and indeed collective bargaining, on which the report is not quite so strong, to seal agreements around advances in the social contract to support workers. And that happened in many developing countries as well, with new social protection schemes, with job protection, income protection, access to health. But what wasn't possible for many of the poorer countries was to shore up their businesses to the extent that was necessary, with the conditions the minister outlined for retention of jobs and income support. So some of the global initiatives you can see in, first of all, in the first phase, it was to keep the essential supply chains open. Transport workers, customs officials, union supporting workers that needed supplies on the front lines. They were our first port of call. The second was to look at where we could get global support for collapsing supply chains. And one of the best known examples is indeed the textile agreement with employers, the ILO and ourselves, and key countries where the garment and the textile, footwear and garment industry is in fact in trouble because global demand is very weak. But it exposed some other areas as well. We actually know that during the 2008-2009 crisis, there was a lot of consultation, negotiation, social dialogue around the too big to fail banks and the lack of equity capacity. And one of the resulting pieces of legislation there was, in fact, that banks have to carry greater equity reserves now. We were quite shocked to see that the just-in-time model had extended to operating reserves, so that some of the big companies in the most vulnerable sectors in manufacturing, not just the garment industry, but indeed in other areas of manufacturing, did not have 3 months of operating reserves to actually protect workers and business in their supply chains, or even to honour contracts that had already been made. So these are the areas that we've tried to get support into. But can I say that for the future, we need a much bigger plan for a new social contract that has jobs at its helm. And supply chains will face many pressures, not just how you rebuild global demand, but the issues of technology and onshoring, what the supply chains look like in that context, and how you actually move to global models where you manufacture for the domestic market, even if it's in a global framework, and therefore formalise many of those informal jobs that where workers, more than 1 billion workers are actually facing destitution. It would be remiss of me not to finish this question, the answer to this question, with saying to you, and we have a very big problem for workers right now in the shipping industry, because maritime workers are stuck. Many of them have been stuck for months and months on ships. Their agreements globally under the IMO, ILO convention is that they have a rotational guarantee. But in fact, that hasn't been honoured, because despite the best efforts of the ILO, I think the OECD's come into this as well, the UN, lots of associations around the world, and of course the IMO and the industry itself with the ITF. We cannot get agreements with countries to allow those workers to transit home. So, you know, there's still much work to be done to get this economy flowing, but we simply cannot see the world of work as it was. We have to really look at what a future world of work is in terms of not just decent work and just wages and therefore a share of the prosperity, but indeed, the plans that will get us there and the social dialogue and collective bargaining underpinnings. The Minister talked about the work of NEDLAC. I was talking to my COSATU colleague last night, and we can see many of these plans emerging through dialogue in developed countries. But the jobs plan of South Africa, which is just in phase 1, and there's another negotiation this week, is one of the models that we need to see everywhere. How do the social partners and the government agree on a future that has at the heart of that social contract jobs, jobs and jobs, with indeed social protection, universal social protection, and a transformative agenda for participation of women, and that means investment in care, and of course the just transition that we want for technology and climate, which we can't ignore. So I would say to you that the ILO Centenary Declaration frames these issues. It frames the breakdown in the employment relationship and what we need as a labour protection floor. And we should really look at how we focus this work on implementing the ILO Declaration and the future of work in supply chains.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Sharan, just to say, Boitumelo, Moloi, we have you back. I'm sorry, but I'll let you talk again afterwards. I'd like to just continue with our other two panelists first, but I will come back to you. Sanna, Lindgren, the pandemic has obviously exposed all kinds of vulnerabilities, especially of the global supply chains, which are operating on razor-thin margins, and we have a lot of workers are paid poverty wages. What can we do to make, would you suggest, more resilient global chains?
So first of all, I would like to say thank you for letting us be a part of this panel from Lindex point of view. And this is something that is really important to us to be able to contribute in. When it comes to resilient global supply chains, we can see, of course, that the impact of COVID-19 has shown the vulnerability and the challenges, as you said, in the global garment value chains. And of course, this is especially the case for women, since they constitute the majority of the garment workers globally. And they are concentrated in the low pay, low power positions. They are underrepresented in the unions and other organizations. And on top of that, they have additional unpaid care of children, elderly, and the sick. And as a brand, as Lindex, it is more important than ever that we have a holistic and a transparent approach in order to make collaborations at all levels possible. The immediate effects of the crisis have been severe, but the situation also offers an opportunity to rebuild structures in a more sustainable way, the way we see it. But to do this, collaboration between the private and the public sector is key. And that is one of the reasons why Lindex endorsed the COVID-19 call for action, for example. From our point of view, we see some key points for social dialogue and collaboration between the private and the public sector and the government. And they are social security systems for workers. We need to build functioning social security system for workers, including unemployment benefits. Empowered workers. We need empowered workers that are aware of their rights. We need collective bargaining and negotiations between different parts of the labor market. Women empowerment to us is really important, and we have to improve the situation for women in the global garment industry and work for gender equality. At Lindex, we have an example, a program, a system, We Women Management System, where we work to improve the situation for women. And the fourth is digitized wage payment and financial education, especially for women. And I would like to give one example on when collaboration really can be key to success. And it's about the digitized wage payments from Bangladesh. The COVID-19 support package for the garment sector was only available for employers paying digital wages. And Lindex, we have been working with some of our suppliers for about 5 years together with BSR, Business for Social Responsibility, and the UN-hosted the Better Cash Alliance to move from cash to digitalized wages with very little success. But now it took 2 weeks. And we, as far as we know, in total, about 800 factories in Bangladesh did this in 2 weeks. So to be able to scale, we need to have a great collaboration between the private and the public sector, and that we as brand, of course, need to be, we play an important part.
Okay, well, thank you for those introductory comments, Sanna Lindgren. I'll now hand over to José María Vera from Oxfam. Obviously, the global flagship report describes how the pandemic exposes the problem of inequalities, as we just heard from Sanna, hitting the low-paid and precarious workers at most. I'd like to hear what Oxfam's analysis of this is, and were there any particular examples, for example, that struck you most?
Well, thanks, Alex, and thank you, Minister Hallberg, Guy, gracias, Angel, for hosting today's agenda, and thanks to all the brilliant colleagues at the Global Ds for this flagship report. It's really a good one. Yes, of course, we do share this analysis, and we add that the pandemic isn't just exposing, but also hugely exacerbating inequality. In fact, we at Oxfam we are calling it the Inequality Virus as such. Our research shows that 500 million people could be forced into poverty as a result of COVID-19. That sets back the fight against poverty decades. In some countries and in some regions. But we must connect the suffering at the bottom to the behavior we are witnessing at the top. And I think that governments still haven't woken up to the sheer scale and speed at which wealth is spiraling upwards. Our new research on corporate behavior last month, titled Power, Profits and the Pandemic, shows what is happening in practice. For example, how 32 of the world's largest companies stand to see their profits jump in 2020 by 109 billion, more than their average in the past years. Or how the top 100 stock market winners have added more than 3 trillion to their market value since the pandemic. You wanted somehow a striking example, Alex, and let me give one. Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, could personally pay each of Amazon's 876,000 employees a one-time 105,000 bonus today, and he would be still as wealthy as he was at the beginning of the pandemic. As our report shows, this is a company that at the same time has been accused of fighting attempts by its workers to organize and retaliating against them for speaking out. And this is very much a global story about an economic model that allows those with most power and wealth to push risk onto those with least. It is the poorest people. It is women, racial and ethnic minorities or migrants who are significantly impacted. I think of India, where hundreds of tea plantation workers, many of them women, have gone unpaid as a result of the lockdown, while some of its largest Indian tea companies have in fact boosted their profits. Or how Nigeria's largest cement company, Dangote Cement, fired more than 3,000 staff without notice or due process, though the company is still expected to pay 136% of its profits to shareholders in 2020. So in summary, the inequality crisis is at heart is about excessive returns to capital over labor. COVID has put these on steroids. But social dialogue, as you have all said, is an act of resistance to this. It rebalances power in the favor of workers, and this is why the global deal has such a vital role to play now, and this report is excellent for showing that. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much, José. Maria, thank you very much indeed. You're sending in questions. If you're watching us, please continue. You can send in any question you like. We are receiving quite a few questions. So to our speakers, if you could keep your replies brief, because I would like to go on a little bit later to the questions which are coming in. Now, before we go on to talk more about the role of social dialogue and social partners' engagement in promoting the effective skills development and lifelong learning systems and policies equipped for the future of work. I'd like to go back to Deputy Minister Moloi. I hope the connection holds out this time, and ask you a follow-up question, because I think it's quite interesting about South Africa's response to COVID-19. The government and social partners, I think, have agreed on an action plan for economic recovery in the post-COVID-19 era. What exactly does this plan involve, and what is the role of the social partners in its implementation? If you could be brief, thank you.
Thank you once more, Mr. Alex Taylor. I think as a point of departure, I need to also bring to our attention the fact that as South Africa, in the second quarter, we lost 2.2 million jobs, and thousands of workers were temporarily laid off. So unemployment in South Africa is quickly closing in on 50% if the expanded definition of employment is utilized. So I wanted to put that as a point of departure, but we should be aware of the fact that NECLEC is actually a platform for discussion that looked at creating new interventions to resuscitate the economy in the post-COVID phase. But over and above that, I also want to inform the panel that our president, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, also chairs a working committee of NECLEC on a bi-monthly basis. He is the one who chairs it, to check actually progress in terms of what has been committed by social partners at NECLEC in particular. But also what is more significant is the fact that on the 15th of October, just the past Thursday, on 2020, our president, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, revealed an economic recovery plan, which others calls your job stimulus. And this plan is aimed at expediting the recovery of our economy, which, like most economies, were deeply affected by COVID-19 pandemic. And this economic recovery plan seeks to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and also we're trying to grow the economy by 3%, and at least spending 1 trillion on infrastructure and hiring at least 300,000 assistant teachers to stimulate the economy, among others, but not limited to. And for that matter, we have set aside 13.8 billion rand, which the president actually unveiled, which will be injected in efforts to create 800,000 more jobs and economic opportunities by the end of March 2021. And additional 86.2 million will be spent on employment creation over the next 2 years. But broadly speaking, and in closing, our objectives of this plan in particular is to create jobs through infrastructure development and mass employment programs. And we want to reindustrialize the economy, also focusing on small businesses and strengthening medium and large businesses, and also accelerating economic forums and investment growth, and fighting crime and corruption, which is a problem in our country. And we want to improve the capability of the state, among others. And in terms of the relevance of the labor market, the economic recovery plan will also aim to protect jobs in the vulnerable sectors, which were particularly hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Sharan, Burrow, coming over to you, emphasizing a human-centered approach. The 2019 ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work underlines that promoting the acquisition of skills, competencies, and qualifications for all workers throughout their working lives is a joint responsibility of governments and social partners. Tell us what you think is the role of workers' organisations to enhance the contribution of social dialogues on skills development and learning throughout life.
Well, the experience we all have is that where there is social dialogue, skills councils across the industry partners, areas of agreement about the way to develop skills, both entry-level skills and lifelong learning, they have been more successful. Where it's built into the industrial policy of and the industrial system of the country, then they're both quality and sustainable, and they're funded with the share across business and government. But I would say skills are vital, but you can't see skills in absence of the transition we're going through, whether it's the transition of the economy, whether it's a particular climate element. Whatever the transition is, every sector at this point has to transition. And if you look at what that takes in a just transition frame, then it takes, first of all, an agreement on what just transition measures mean in the context of the plan for transition. And that will mean secure pensions, bridges to pensions for slightly younger workers where they choose. It will mean actually skills, employment support, skills and redeployment support, as well as income support through the skilling process. But there's a broader issue too. If we're going to keep adjusting to the challenges of a new economic model and indeed just transition, then and the technological futures, which are both have opportunities and threats. One of the issues my brother from Oxfam raised is, in fact, the global monopoly power of big tech companies. So they must be broken up, and we must share through a range of taxation, collective bargaining, social protection, a future that actually doesn't treat workers just as robots, but skills them for the relationship. So in that context, skills are at the centre of sustaining the capacity of workers. But first of all, we have to have the jobs plan into which they're integrated. And I would say on the question of wages, if we don't put social protection and wages in the mix there, then you won't get the trust of workers. So you can't separate these issues one from one if you want a genuinely human-centred approach.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And I'd like to hear Sanna Lindgren's point of view on this. Obviously, new skills will increasingly be required across the entire fashion industry, logistics, marketing, design, product development, and so forth. It'd be interesting to hear how Lindex manages the career skills development of its staff. What are the main challenges that you're facing, and what's the contribution to social dialogue to shaping future-ready adult learning strategies and programs? How can you adapt to all that?
Thank you. First of all, we address this question in many different ways, of course. It is something that is really important to us to secure like a resilient and future-proof company, of course. We are a company that is founded in Sweden, and it's based really on Swedish values, no matter where in the world we operate. So the dialogue with our employees and with the unions comes very naturally in our company. Of course, we discuss the skills development continuously throughout the year, and we conclude it on a yearly basis on a one-on-one dialogue with the manager and the employee, of course. But the most important learnings is the learning on an everyday basis. So we try to work together in teams, both in the stores and at the offices, to learn from each other on a day-to-day basis, because that's the best way to learn new things and to really practice them straight away. But another important part is, of course, the dialogue with the unions. And since we are based in Sweden, we have that in our culture at Lindex. And we have united on a competence definition to secure that we, together with the unions, address all aspects of competence. Not only like the formal knowledge and the experiences, but also the skills and the abilities and the personal values. Because to us, this is part of competence at Lindex. And that's the way we make sure to address the full potential in every individual. And if we see it from the company perspective, it is, of course, of utmost importance that our employees like highly skilled in their expertise areas, but also their digital savviness and the ability to practice self-leadership and the ability to learn. Those things are really important for the future. So we conduct programs internally to train and develop all our employees to strengthen their employability in the long-term perspective. And the ability to learnability is key to success in the future, both for the individual and for the company. Another way to create social dialogue, of course, is that we ask our employees how they see their development internally at Lindex, how committed and engaged they are to Lindex. And we are very proud because we have really highly committed and engaged employees. But we also see that we need to make the collaboration with the employees and the unions even stronger in the future. So we right now explore new ways to be even closer to our employees by using digital interactive tools that can help us not only to ask how has your development been, but also try to predict the future needs of skills development at an early stage on an individual and on a company level. So that's one thing that we are addressing and exploring right now.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that example. So far, Global Deal partners, I think, have made around 100 commitments to promote social dialogue as a means for achieving decent work and inclusive growth. The 2020 Flagship Report, and I think this is in Chapter 4 of the report, includes the selection of global deal commitments made by partners together with information on actions undertaking to fulfill them. Just perhaps a final round of questions before I come on to your questions on highlighting some of the concrete actions taken by partners. Sanna, I'll just come back to you because you mentioned before, obviously, female workers constitute more than half of the garment and textile global workforce, disproportionately suffering from the disruption caused by the pandemic. In which way is Lindex active in closing gender gaps and promoting gender equality throughout your industry?
Thank you. Although women constitute the majority of the total workforce, we can also see that mid-level to upper management remains mostly male. Factory owners and managers, as the way we see it, remain poorly informed about the significance of gender issues. We are aware of this global problem, and we have therefore created this program, as I talked about earlier, Lindex Women Management System, in cooperation with GIZ. And through the social dialogue, we work with management and owners on changing cultural norms and improve gender equality issues in the factories. By giving the management awareness raising and training, we are trying to reduce the gender gap in management positions by giving women opportunity to skills training and mentorship. And we put special attention to female workers' health needs and closing wage gap. In this context, we have also a new Lindex Code of Conduct which have a strong gender equality focus. It started out as a private-public partnership together with GIZ in Bangladesh in 2017, and this project will end in November 2020. And we have established a model for women's empowerment, which is open to use for other brands and factories to ensure that we have it has a long-term impact. And we are right now finalizing gender-specific performance criteria, which suppliers and buyers alike can integrate into their own management systems. So by sharing the results of this initiative with other buyers and other business associations and through the cooperation with GIZ, we will contribute to a new model for the mainstreaming of gender issue on a larger scale across the industry. And we are going to introduce this management system in our whole supply chain and have already incorporated part of our Myanmar factories as well as our Indian factories. And progress is measured, of course, and we do it in our scorecard twice a year. And our goal is that in 2025, we will have covered our whole global supply chain. So this is one way for us to show that collaboration is really successful when it comes to gender equality.
Okay, thank you very much for those concrete examples of what you've been doing. Sanna, a question to José María. Vera, it'd be interesting to hear your take from Oxfam on the state of labour rights at the moment, your most recent analysis, and what does this mean for building better labour markets after the devastation caused by the pandemic?
Well, thanks you, Alex, and thanks to the participants for the inputs. This is a really central question for us. What happens, not what happens next, but what happens now during the pandemic. Let me say first that we have just launched our commitment to reducing inequality index. It's the 5th edition, and it has a very strong labor component on it. The index analyzes over 20 indicators for 158 countries to understand just how committed governments are to reducing inequality in their own countries. We have 3 pillars there in that index, and labor rights with a focus on women's labor is one of them. The other 2 are all the area of taxation and social spending on health and on education. Actually, it relies on the powerful data that is produced by Ilo, OECD, and ITUC, to name some. So it's quite in this event. A few days ago, we just published our latest index, and I would definitely urge you all, if you can read it, both to find your own countries and what is the broader analysis that is brought there. You can find it in inequalityindex.org. First, the index tells a global story about just how unprepared governments were leading into the pandemic. Actually, one of the findings is that in more than 100 countries, at least 1 in 3 workers had no labor protection, such as sick pay. But second, and I think it is even more interesting, it's the individual stories that the index shares, and these are both leading into the pandemic, but also during these months. For example, the USA, that trails 17 low-income countries like Liberia on labor laws due to anti-union policies and low minimum wage, or India, that, for example, has seen several of its states using COVID-19 as a pretext to increase daily working hours and suspend minimum pay legislation. But there are also positive stories, and it's important to highlight them. South Korea responded to the pandemic by instituting universal relief payments for 22 million households, the latest in quite a number of inequality boosting moves. Or here in my country, Spain, where a basic income has been introduced for over 2 million people, and where social dialogue has actually played a key role in this action. So what is the lesson here for what comes now? That yes, governments need to get a handle on inequality urgently, and that nearly every government isn't doing enough for it. But also that they have a huge scope to act, and that proof is that not just Oxfam, but what other governments are doing themselves, and that is governments both rich, poor, for example, in Ethiopia or in New Zealand, that can significantly increase maternity and paid parental leave, or if Sierra Leone and South Korea can increase all the minimum wages, then why can't others do it? There are, of course, a few examples only, but it helps make clear that inequality is not inevitable or is falling from heaven, but it's about policy choices that can be made before and very much now during COVID-19.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm now going to take, we have quite a few questions from the participants. Thank you very much for sending in your questions. If you would like to answer, please raise your hand so I can see you have something to say. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So one, for example, 61% of the world's jobs are informal. Would the panelists agree that a comprehensive approach to social dialogue must take much better account of all people who work informally? Anybody like to make a comment on that about, yes, Sharan, Burrow, could you briefly?
Well, this is critical. If you have 500 million jobs lost in the formal sector, of which a third are indeed insecure, but 1.6 billion people facing destitution potentially in the informal sector, you can't rebuild anything that's just and sustainable. So last year we addressed this issue because it's not just in poor and developing countries, it's actually also our new platform businesses, basically any internet mediated contracts. These are informal work. The solution's very simple. Go back to José's prescription, the rule of law with fundamental rights. In the Centenary Declaration, the government, employers and workers negotiated a labour protection floor. 4 critical elements underpinning every area of work, whether you have a formal contract or not. It is, of course, fundamental rights, occupational health and safety, which COVID's exposed as being a disaster, and we must, in fact, see that as a fundamental right. That's a huge argument for the ILO right now. And indeed, a minimum living wage or an adequate minimum wage, evidence-based. Why do we build wealth if we're not prepared to pay workers decent wages or share prosperity through collective bargaining and taxation? And finally, maximum hours of work. That's the recipe. You put that under every job and you eliminate the very fundamental risks of informal work, which is just dehumanising exploitation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. How can we include more the employers' associations in the Global Deal initiatives? Anybody like to take that one on? Maybe Sanna?
Yes, I think that's quite a hard question to answer just as one representative from the employer side. But I think when it comes to Lindex, I think this is something that the social dialogue and the skills part of the flagship report is really important to us because we have put that in the heart of our work. We have a higher purpose that is to empower and inspire women. So for us, it comes very naturally, and I think it has to be that. It has to be something that you really want to work with and really want to join forces together with others to approach. So I think, I hope this report will inspire others to be a greater part of the global deal.
Okay, somebody here says, sending in a question, we all agree on the added value of social dialogue, obviously, but in many countries, it simply doesn't exist, or it's very weak, I quote. What can we or can the ILO do to improve the situation, legislative reforms and capacity building? Who would like to take that on? What about, yes, Boitumelo, or would you like to say something about how we can encourage more social dialogue? Because you've been doing a lot of it in South Africa.
Sorry, I have to unmute. No, I think, yes, we are doing well so far in terms of our social dialogue, but I wanted to come in earlier on, especially on the question of informal economy, that representation, in our case, they do have a representation in NETLAC, But we also agree, obviously, it's not necessarily like they have a direct participation because there you have formalized bodies that are represented by a national structure. So we agree with the sentiment that says that they should be consulted from time to time, where possible, if they are able to regroup and form their own structure as informal traders, they should be able and be allowed to form part of our bigger structures like NETLEC, and their issues must be incorporated, because we have seen recently, due to this coronavirus, that indeed the informal traders were not necessarily an informal, whatever we call informal employment, they were not necessarily covered by legislation, and we think that we need to review and go back and check legislation as to how do we include them and formalize them. Thank you.
Okay, and I saw José María, who I think wanted to add something on that point. José María.
Yes, actually, I was going to make a couple of connected points in the informal workers question, and also how to enhance social dialogue with a couple of examples that are also coming in our report, and probably we know. So to put also that positive side, echoing what Sharan has said. And actually saying that it's basically women who are in the informal sectors, and that pandemics has shown what it means to live in a daily wage for each one of them. But on that side of including them in the economy, in the rules, and in the dialogue, a couple of good examples that we have. As Malawi, that has created a trade union for the informal economy. Senegal, that has put a law into law the rights of informal workers to get same rights as formal workers. So good examples with social dialogue behind, where it's difficult also and challenging to do it.
Okay, one obviously director at Sanna, does Lindex feel responsible for the effects of work on workers in Asian countries of lower demand, more circular textile and restoring to Europe? This will have effect on employment, obviously, in the factories. Don't know if you want to answer that one.
Well, I'm happy to answer it. I mean, that's one of the factors that will actually change the nature of supply chains. So we have to have a really serious look as we redesign the future of work and what a jobs plan is, so that we are actually providing work everywhere. We're formalising work, we're providing work at the national level as well as through the supply chains internationally, because we are not going to see the same level of demand. We're going to see technology and, of course, the circular economy, which is vital to actually stabilise the planet, will have to operate in every country. So, again, there's opportunities at the domestic level, but it will require industry policy, and it will require financing the recovery with a jobs and a climate lens. So climate and employment proofing our workplace. That means you're investing in these questions. And I really want to just add to the question about how do you get more employers on board. Frankly, if you have a commitment in your legislation to the right to bargain collectively, you have to have social dialogue. If you have proper compliance systems, which start with mediation and conciliation before it goes to formal arbitration or indeed the formal courts of our lands, then you have social dialogue. So it comes back to the rule of law. How do you actually implement fundamental rights without social dialogue? You don't. It's that simple. And Gurría talked about initiatives like the B4IG group. There's others around the world which are actually very committed to these questions we're raising and to the dialogue with unions and civil society where that's necessary in terms of just transition and questions of community. So we certainly think that when you use the rule of law, you support the business that want to see change, then we can actually see that this is possible.
Sanna, the question was directed to you. One sentence, because we're running out of time. Do you feel responsible?
of course, we feel responsible for what we can affect, of course. And if it will turn out that there are lesser jobs in, for example, Bangladesh, it's even more important that we continue to strengthen and empower the women in the factories and give them adequate skills and educations within technical skills, for example, or digitalizing skills, etc. So, of course, we are following the development really closely.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. I'm sorry to have rushed you a little bit at the end, but thank you for making those very interesting comments. That was our panel discussion. Thank you too also for sending in your questions. I tried to ask as many as we could. So our four speakers will say goodbye now. You can switch off your videos, but thank you very much. A big round of applause virtually from around the world. Thank you very much indeed. So obviously, before we conclude, we've covered a lot of very complex issues today, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the role of social partners in adult learning and skills development, lots of things which were touched on by our speakers. I think the thing that we can all take away is the importance in investing in social dialogue for a better future in all of our work environments. I'm going to ask our three main speakers who you saw at the beginning now to switch back on their videos to make some closing remarks, 2 minutes each, just to respond to what we have just heard when they were listening to the panel discussion. So if I can ask Anna Hallberg, Guy Ryder and Gurría to switch back on. You already have. There we are. Perfect. Minister, first of all, I'll come to you. 2 minutes, just a general takeaway, conclusion based on what we've heard, please. Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Taylor, again. And indeed, thank you all for a very inspiring and constructive and initiated dialogue that I have just had the privilege to listen to. And we have come to the end of today's launch event of the Global Deal Flagship Report 2020. I think this was, even though, of course, we all would have preferred to meet in real life, this was a very good opportunity for bringing some more oxygen into this very important initiative. And I, again, thank you all so much for your constructive remarks. Besides this year's thematic focus on the role of social dialogue to promote lifelong learning and skills development, the role of social partners in the response to COVID-19 pandemic this has really shown how this is so imperative. And as I stated in my introduction, it is vital now for us social partners to play a prominent part in shaping change in these difficult times. And again, the global deal, this is what it's really all about. I mean, sharing experience, good practices, and also test some ideas on each other. And it's also very important to remember that the conditions for each partner varies a lot. I saw some remarks about that also. Of course, it varies greatly between different countries, different partners and so on. A model that works well in one country for one partner does not necessarily work in another context, but this is also what the partnership is all about, to embrace that. I just wanted to raise one. I got so inspired when we heard a question of how do we include employers and employers' organizations and businesses. And I think for me, spending almost in my entire life in the business sector, it should be so obvious that the advantages for the businesses and the employers' organizations to be a partner of the global deal and also embrace the social dialogue. It's really, as I said in my introduction, a win-win-win situation. And of course, to include the employees in the company's competitiveness, in the business models and so on, it's so important that we can see the advantages for the business as well. So let's try to do that together and really formulate this. The social dialogue and the tripartite collaboration is something so rare and so important. And I think we all here see that this is a solution to very many of our problems right now. So again, thank you very much for inspiring at least me very much, and I hope all of us. And I do look forward to continue this dialogue about the social dialogue. So thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Minister. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's go over to the ILO with Guy Ryder. Your concluding remarks, your takeaways, 2 minutes if you could.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Well, I too was inspired by the panel discussion. It was an extremely wide-ranging discussion, I have to say. So we covered not only skills, but supply chains, inequality, informality, the maritime sector. And you could get the impression in this global deal discussion that we have the sensation that one answer fits all. And the answer is social dialogue. It's the all-purpose solution. And guess what? When it comes to the world of work, it more or less is. It's very difficult to think of an issue that we have to deal with that would not benefit from the application of social dialogue. And I think there's two cross-cutting reasons for that. And something that José María said really brought this to my mind. You know, in the end, social dialogue is an exercise of democracy and participation, and it's an exercise in producing fairness, equitable outcomes. And we are badly in need of both of those things in the world today, not least under the impact of COVID-19. And that begs the other question: if it's so great and we think it's also wonderful, why aren't more people doing it? You know, why isn't everybody doing it? And I think there are two answers to that as well. One is there are very obvious reasons why there is political rejection of social dialogue. For those who would espouse a sort of a winner-takes-all attitude towards working life, that people should lever their economic power, their financial power, their political connections to take everything, well, social dialogue is not a great idea. So I think we have to make the case on the basis of fairness and democratic process and participation. And the second reason, I conclude with this, Alex, to keep in the time limits, is social dialogue is not easy. Minister Hallberg said at the beginning, this doesn't all happen overnight. Countries like Sweden have built up institutions, habits, trust over a very long time. And I think that's one thing where the global deal can really help. Capacities of the participants and the institutions, the enabling environment to make a reality of these, the great things we're talking about. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Guy Ryder. Secretary General, we'll hand over to you for the final conclusion on today's proceedings.
Enabled to adopt policies that save jobs, stabilize the economy, allow working time to be more flexible, improve protection against the virus in the workplace. So it already proved to be a very useful tool. But of course, the pandemic is not only a health and jobs crisis, it's also a crisis of inequalities, and those were discussed at length. And inequalities come at a very high price. They hinder upward mobility, they hold back investment in education as well as in human capital and physical investment in general, which create jobs. It undermines the trust that is so essential to respond effectively to crises. So we need to make sure that the gains of the recovery are more broadly shared, as Guy Ryder suggested. It's a question of sharing, you know, how to use the question of the global deal and the global dialogue, the social dialogue, to share better, to share more. We need to create labor markets to generate more and better jobs. That's why the work of the global deal, as well as that very complementary to, but also mutually reinforcing with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, go together. So social dialogue plays a critical role in building a more inclusive, resilient, sustainable recovery. And that is why, this is what the global deal is really about. It's about generating these possibilities of a more inclusive, resilient, sustainable recovery. Now, I would add post-COVID. It's a coalition of different stakeholders working together to advance the case for social dialogue as a way to jointly tackle labor market challenges. And let me just say, it's about, in the end, it's a social dialogue for well-being. If it doesn't end up in greater well-being, and it will not work. So please count on the OECD. We will continue working with all stakeholders to ensure that social dialogue remains at the top of our agendas. And I also hope that, as Mr. Hallberg said, we will recruit more members, both governments, but also companies, members of civil society. We don't need to be universal, but we do need this, what I would call the critical mass, that will then deliver principles, that will then deliver some of the best, as we have seen now in paragraph 4 that you mentioned, Alex, on the chapter 4, where you have these examples. And then the examples can become, you don't need to have 200 members or country members, but you can have this, the issuance of these good practices, these good examples that will benefit everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. A big round of applause, I'm sure, if we were in a room, Secretary General, because I'm sure you realized the Minister and the Director General were nodding a lot during your conclusions. I think the points have been taken on board. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you for watching us wherever you are around the world. I think we've had hundreds of participants tuning in. You can download the report. I'm sure you're keen after our discussion to discover the details of it. I hope you've that we've made you want to read it in more detail. The details of how to download it. There you are. Download the full report on theglobaldeal.com/resources. So thank you so much for having joined us, having asked your questions, for your attention, and bye-bye, and see you soon. Bye-bye.